Hello. As an introduction, I am technically Lord Squire, but Atheris Labrise, and I came up here from the Emerald Hills, which is a kingdom down towards Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. About a couple years ago, started attending the Crystal Groves in October. But while I was down there, one of the things that I was better known for was Plasti. So tonight's kind of class slash talk is going to be the introduction phase to working with Plasti and foam smithing. We will be doing a variety of classes in different stages of the work that move from not just these are the basics of how it works, but also into some foam craft tips and tricks, how to do some troubleshooting, and then the application and finishing of a product. Some of the classes will be done purely through Discord with pictures and or little bits of information, and then other portions will actually be out at field at Angler's Rift, which is in Catonsville, which is a little south of Baltimore, on certain days following that or added to our schedule. So if you have curiosity and wanted to do a build along or bring stuff out to the park when I'm working on those days, I am happy to help mentor you through specific processes that you might have questions on. But to work through the slides, let's get into what we're going to be covering. Essentially, what is Plasti, the materials and protective equipment that you should use when working with it, and what to know when getting started with Plasti in general and Plasti for LARPing. Plasti is specifically a versatile air-dry specialty synthetic rubber coating that can be applied by spraying, brushing, dipping. In LARP, it's used as a protective paintable coating for foam weapons and shields. And if you guys could give me just one moment, I actually need to change something on the recording. So you're welcome to talk and or ask questions while I am doing this.
Is Flex Seal also Plasti?
Technically, they serve the same function in what they are designed for. It is not suggested as something that you should use for LARP weapons, specifically because you have a different flexibility, a different tack, and one is more prone to tearing and easier to work with than others. So it's just kind of you can very easily find them side by side and a couple of other competitors that have come up, but there's a reason why Plasti kind of holds true as the go-to for both LARP and for cosplay.
Okay, thank you.
Happy to answer those questions. Let's get this resized. Okay. There we go. Okay, so you'll also see on the screen a couple of examples of Plasti used for LARP. Everything except for the wooden textured shield are previous kind of thrown together items of mine. From way back in like the mid-teens. Generally speaking, when working with Plasti, because it does have some dangerous qualities to it, you are going to need to know not just about the different types of Plasti, but protective equipment that you would be using when working with it. You can find Plasti in the stores typically in two different forms. The company itself does make a variety of other products, but we are mostly going to be working with Plasti Dip in the dip or brush on can, which you can see further to the left, or an aerosol spray can, which is further to the right. Beginners will often aim for the spray can because it seems like it's a better deal. Sometimes it will be a little bit cheaper and you go, oh, the price of this fluid ounce versus this fluid ounce, it looks like it's going to work for me. But the thing to remember with the spray Plasti Dip is that some of those ounces do come from a higher solvent amount in there. So just like if you are kind of watering down alcohol or adding more water to your Kool-Aid, you're not going to have as much of the quote-unquote desired liquid. So you are going to end up having to use more of the spray Plasti Dip than you would of the brush on. An easy way to kind of get around both is to pick up mostly the brush on Plasti Dip and maybe one can of the spray, and use the spray to help level out your brush strokes so that when it's going on, again, much thicker, you're not ending up with little streaks and strokes from however you end up applying it. Now, you will notice on any Plasti Dip can that there is a big flashing warning danger sign at the bottom, and that is because of the types of solvents that are in it, much like in contact cement, which is the common glue that is used for creating our weapons and shields. Because these are very strong carcinogens and will actually release very dangerous fumes that can cause damage to your lungs, damage to your eyes, it is suggested that you wear protective equipment when working with it, whether inside or out, but especially if you are working in it in an enclosed environment, such as in a shed, in a garage, in a paint booth, because that is trapping those fumes in with you. There are a couple of different types of masks that you could potentially pick up. Usually they run somewhere between $25 to $40 depending on how fancy you get with them. Any questions about what those dangerous solvents might be? You can throw them into the text chat as well. Thank you very much, Salem. Catonsville, not Catonsville. All right. For the protective equipment, if you are going to be wearing gloves, because it can and will dry out your skin, you will want to use nitrile because latex ends up interacting strangely with the solvent that is in Plasti Dip. For your masks, you want to use specifically an organic vapor cartridge on whichever mask or respirator you put on. The two that are most common and that are best to use are going to be the 60923 or the 6001 that you will need to combine with a particulate filter because, again, you don't want to be breathing any of that in. Once or twice, you're probably going to be fine, but for prolonged exposure, definitely not something that you want to be doing. These also, again, are rated for use with contact cement. So if you're making a lot of shields, a lot of swords, daggers, weapons, etc. for LARP, this is the same type of equipment that you would use for dealing with contact cement. Application tools. You'll see some people start with chip brushes as their way to brush on the Plasti Dip. I hate chip brushes. There is a reason why they are very cheap. The solvent kind of messes with the glue that helps to keep them together, and inevitably you end up with little strands caught in the Plasti Dip as you're brushing it on, and it usually ends up being a little bit more of a mess than you really want to. If you're going to get something cheap to work with, go for the foam brushes. Yes, they will absorb some of your Plasti dip, but at least they're not going to fall apart as you are using them. For a slightly nicer brush or something that's a little bit easier to work with, say you are working on a large shield, a wide, cheap acrylic brush works very, very well. That is going to typically stay together a little bit better, and it's not going to leave as thick of streaks as the chip brush would. And then for small application, you can just go to like the Dollar Tree or even certain thrift stores and pick up a silicone makeup / mask applicator. This Plasti dip will not stick to it, neither will DAP. It will just peel right off as soon as it's dried, and that is a very easy reuse material that you can pick up. Highly suggest it for anyone that is making things on a regular basis. Working surfaces, and here is where certain people really want to pay closer attention. There are different types of foam that we use in AmpGuard and a variety of other LARPs, and the type of foam that you use is going to heavily affect how your Plasti dip and your product ends up looking. Polyethylene and cross-linked polyethylene are the most commonly accessible foams that we have to use for making our weapons and shields. Generally, the shields that you find, at least of the blanks and the Omnibat, like buy it and put it together kits, are generally going to be regular polyethylene, which is the one that's a little bit on top. It's a slightly larger cell, while still closed cell foam, and has a little bit more squish and give to it than EVA, which is ethylene vinyl acetate. But when working with that as your surface for Plasti dip, you will always be able to kind of tell that slightly rougher outer texture unless you skin it with a much thinner microcell foam. Cross-linked polyethylene does exist. It is harder to find, but it does definitely exist. It has virtually invisible or barely visible cells to it, so it holds detail a lot better, and it's always much, much smoother. It's a lot easier to sand as well. EVA, or ethylene vinyl acetate, is commonly found in like kids' craft foam or puzzle mats. So certain people, when constructing their shields typically, will use puzzle mat as the harder foam because it's a higher poundage density and it holds its form really, really well. When you get it in puzzle mat form, it'll have a like hardened plastic coating on one side, and you'll want to sand that off if you're going to use it for Plasti dip, because Plasti dip will kind of peel off of that pretty easily. There's nothing for it to really bind to. That's why you also want to sand it if you're going to use contact cement to bind those two pieces together in that particular area. But both EVA and cross-linked polyethylene work very, very well to hold detail. Why would I use regular polyethylene instead of cross-linked, so PE instead of XPE, is going to be if I want a rougher, more organic texture. If I was making, say, a sword pommel that I wanted to look like the base of an elk antler, or if I was using foam to make a shield and I wanted it to look more like rough wood or stone, then I would probably actually use the macrocell foam like polyethylene, because it's going to have that naturally rough texture for me to work with instead of me having to apply something for it. Foam clay. I have never worked with foam clay, at least in terms of weapons and shields for LARP. However, a very prominent Plasti dip artist in our kingdom has informed me that it does work very, very well with Plasti dip, at least if you let it cure properly first. And it is a really good way to get very intricate detail without you having to jump through 1,000 hoops with tiny little bits cut together and glued together like a puzzle. So it has a lot of potential for Plasti dip craft in LARP and for shields and pommels and guards. I believe that is actually how the skull on that flamberge that Andy was admiring was made. It was probably made with foam clay pressed into a mold and then removed and let to cure. If you are working with foam clay and a mold, one of the ways to do it so that it is easy to get out without damaging the mold is once you've got it pressed in, put it in the freezer until it freezes, and then pull it apart while it's still frozen. It will hold its detail, and then as it thaws, it will begin to cure. And it's supposed to have the same type of flex as you would for like a high poundage density EVA. Oh, it's jumping all over the place. Okay, so getting started. Things to know as you get started using Plasti dip for LARPing. Your foam craft makes your project. The messier your foam craft, the messier your project will be. The nicer your foam craft, the nicer your project will be. If paint can't cover it, Plasti dip can't either. So when you're cutting your foam, use very sharp tools. You can sharpen X-Actos and box cutters using the bottom of a ceramic mug even. So you want a freshly sharp blade. If you haven't freshly changed it out, make sure to sharpen it first before cutting your foam, and you'll have a nice smooth cut versus a very rough cut. If you are using burning, as you can see over here on the wings, you will notice that some of the lines are smoother and some of them are significantly rougher. It's going to require a lot more effort to clean it up if you are hesitant in moving your wood burner or soldering iron when you are making those cuts. An easy way to make fine line cuts so that they show up well on your foam, especially if you are using a microcell foam like cross-linked polyethylene or EVA, is to cut it shallowly with a knife and then hit it with some high heat, either very high heat on a hairdryer or very low heat on a heat gun. And as the foam begins to kind of melt in on itself and spread, the line that you have cut will spread. That is another good way to seal the surface of your foam so that it's nice and smooth prior to applying the Plasti dip so that you have a nicer surface to paint as well. But when using heat like that, just also remember that anything that you have not glued appropriately together on your seams is also going to pull apart from itself, just like a cut would. So make sure that your seams are properly sealed, either with making sure that you have glued them appropriately together or using some sort of sealant to kind of bind the seams, like, say, foam clay. Or a trick that I used to use is puff paint for fabric, like fabric puff paint that you mist and then add some heat and it puffs up. That works really well to help bind the little tiny seams so that they stay together. Now, just like you should not rush when curing your foam clay, don't rush between your layers and between the stages of your project. The solvents that are in Plastidip will also work as solvents in most glues. So if your glue is not fully cured, the solvent can cause the glue to separate. You can see in the image that the type of glue that I was using, it was probably not fully cured. I was rushing. This was a decorative piece. And the solvents kind of crept through the decorative cuts that I had done as battle wounds on this piece and started to separate all of the glue in those spots, and it bubbled up because of chemical reaction causing gas. There are ways to fix it, but it was a pain to do so. So just make sure that your layers are cured in between, whether it's curing your glue, curing your foam clay, or whatever else that you are doing that you're putting the Plastidip on top of. If you are using spray Plastidip and spray Plastidip only, cure the layers completely between sprays, because it will just get tacky and thicker and tacky and thicker if you keep introducing that spray solvent over and over and over again prior to it curing. Once it has cured completely, it's fine. It's not coming apart just from you spraying it. But you do want to make sure that it is cured fully, it is dried fully, and that you are not basically reintroducing a solvent to an uncured piece. Additionally, things that you might end up worrying about or messing with are how the Plastidip interacts with the weather. So conditions are going to be a thing to consider, and there is a reason why spring and summer are considered Plastidip season. Plastidip itself cures best in warm, dry weather, so temperatures between 70 degrees and 80 degrees and specifically low humidity are going to be where it behaves the best, though it will still likely cure well enough at higher temperatures so long as it's mostly dry outside still. Humidity is going to be your biggest enemy, especially during Plastidip season when it's warm enough to deal with, because as the solvents in the Plastidip interact with humidity in the air, it can affect the finish of how it cures because of just chemical interactions of water and the chemicals that are in there. So you can end up with, if you look down at the bottom, little pinholes down on the Plastidip, like it had been stuck a bunch of times with a needle, or you might end up with a chalky finish, as you can see higher up on the, I believe this is a bike seat that was being dipped. So it's something that it is better to wait a day or so for the humidity to come down, or to work where you have access to a dehumidifier near where it is going to be cured. Spray is affected significantly more than brush on in this case because the spray has more of the solvent in it, but brush on can still experience some issues in high humidity. So just kind of keep a close eye on the weather when you're going to be working with it for prolonged periods of time. Application thickness is going to vary, not just in terms of what you're putting it on, but also what you are using when putting it on. The shield off to the side that I believe their name, they are part of Terminus Chaotic Jacks, has been working on recently. You can see that this is fairly thickly covered. This was done, at least to this stage, with brush on. And for a shield that is going to regularly be suffering contact, either by you tossing it places, weapons hitting it, you running into things, because even if we aren't a shield bashing sport, you still run into stuff with your shield. That is going to get significantly more contact, more compression, and more interaction than, say, the pommel of a weapon or the guard of a weapon. So you're going to want a thicker coating of Plasti Dip than you would on just like something that's going to hang from your belt most of the time. You are also going to have to use less layers of the brush on than you would of the spray. This off to the side is the kind of handle of one of my daggers, and what you see here in terms of thickness looks like it might be one layer of the brush on, or not even one layer of the brush on because of how thin it is. That's 2 full layers of the spray on Plasti Dip because of how much thinner it is. You need to do significantly more with the spray when you are using just spray instead of brush on. So it really does cost you significantly more money when you are using the spray on, and you're more likely to encounter issues from it. So it really is suggested that you use the brush on instead of just the spray, or use both if you're going to try and spread it across both. Painting and finishing. Once your Plasti Dip layers are complete and completely cured, you do want to give them a couple of days so that it can completely cure. If it is humid, you need to give it probably a week even. You would then finish it with typically a clear coat and some sort of paint job. Acrylic paints are fairly common. They don't have to be the expensive kind. You can just go and get like some Apple Barrel or Craft Smart paints, or you can, if you have some of the nicer paints, get something like Liquitex Heavy Body. But it's just whatever you happen to throw on. I would not suggest using watercolor or gouache because that is not going to flex or have the same opacity to it. And I definitely would not suggest using oil paint, just from the fact of, 1, it's expensive, but 2, it's going to have weird interactions with the surfaces that you are using. Once you have painted it, you will also want to add some sort of clear coat. A commonly favored thing is to use frog juice, which I know it says sunscreen clear, but it is a protective clear coating that is used for rubber and plastic items when exposed to the sun. So it is an excellent thing to use on Plasti Dip items or painted items like shields, or if you're a cosplayer, your armor, if you're going to be going outside with it. And considering that this is LARP, I would expect that your items are going outside. It can leave it looking a little plasticky and shiny. So if you just dust over some acrylic clear coat like Krylon or Rust-Oleum, that'll kind of cut the plasticky look to it. I don't have this on the slide, but aftercare for your Plasti Dip items, whether it's something that you yourself have made and are using, or something that you have commissioned from someone else, go out and get yourself some cheap spray silicone lubricant and just spray it onto a microfiber cloth, just a little spritz, and wipe it down every couple of months or after some heavy use, and that will reduce the friction on the coating, whether it's the Plasti Dip or the clear coat, etc. And that reduced friction will mean that it wears down significantly slower. I believe that Alphonse down in the Emerald Hills still fairly regularly uses his Plasti Dip daggers from me, and he's had those for probably 10 years. But that comes to the end of the slides and the end of like the basics and intro. I know I went through it pretty quickly. I am going to now stop the recording, so if you do not want your voice recorded, you will be safe.